Comprehensive Reparations, a blueprint for reparatory justice in the United States. And we have none other than the expert in this area. And I say she's the expert because she authored a very comprehensive document on this very topic. My co-host, Jessica M. Mitchell Aberwar, also known as J.A.M. Okay, J.A.M. is a reparationist, and she is a cultural communications specialist based in the Washington, D.C. area. She is an award-winning writer, activist, and poet, and she is the founder of the National Black Cultural Information Trust. She is a descendant of enslaved Africans and Maroons in Georgia and South Carolina. In her past role as Associate Director of Communications at the National Fair Housing Alliance, Aberwar spearheaded strategic communications for federal housing discrimination lawsuits against Bank of America, Deutsche Bank, and Facebook Inc. She also led communications efforts in National Fair Housing Alliance's federal lawsuit against the United States Department of Housing, Urban Development concerning the affirmatively furthering fair housing rule. Additionally, J.A.M. led communications for state lawsuits concerning race, color, familiar status, and source of income housing discrimination. She holds a bachelor's degree in World African Studies from Fort Valley State University. She has a master's of art in Pan-African Studies from the African American Studies Department of Syracuse University, and a Master of Science in Public Relations from SI Newhouse School of Public Communications, also at Syracuse University. And in addition to her work with national organizations and firms, J.A.M. serves as the communications chair for the Pan-African Congress North American delegation. She's also a member of the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America and a commissioner on the National African American Reparations Commission. And she is a member of the Case for Reparations Advisory Committee, an initiative of Liberated Capital's Decolonizing Wealth. And with that, let me shut up and bring on our feature for this evening's thought series, Jessica M. Mitchell Aberwar. J.A.M., take it away, J.A.M.
Thank you so much, Nikichi, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Comprehensive Reparations, a blueprint for reparatory justice in the United States. So this is a really important discussion, basically an ongoing discussion that we've been having in the reparations space on what reparations should look like. And for many of us, we think that there's not enough attention being paid to what a comprehensive model for reparations would look like. So I wanted to start with a definition. This definition comes from Nikichi Taifa's book, Reparations on Fire. So reparations are a form of compensation provided to those who have suffered human rights abuses or other forms of widespread systemic injustices, or to their descendants, usually in the aftermath of war, enslavement, or other forms of gross injustice. It is an act or process of repairing or restoring. One of the things that I think is often lost in the conversations about reparations is memory. And so I wanted to bring up this story, one of the stories of our ancestors, because within memory, one of the things that's often not discussed in the reparations space, because it seems we jump right into slavery and compensation conversations. But I wanted to stop and center focus on our ancestors. And one of the stories that I always come back to is the story of Igbo landing, when a group of Africans were taken from Western Africa and brought to St. Simon Island, Georgia. And this was in the 1800s, and promptly exited a ship when they had an opportunity and walked into the water and lost their lives in an attempt to return back home. So many of them died. Some people describe it as a mass suicide, but I would just describe it as them seeking to return home. And a lot of African American folk tales about Africans flying and that type of thing comes from this story. I wanted to focus on this because I want to start with a people, that we come from a people. Many different peoples of various ethnicities that were African people that were snatched from their homeland and brought to a foreign place and forced to deal with the most horrendous conditions imaginable. And I just want to put center focus on them because they are who we derive from, and they are who we have built this struggle off of. We come from people, and these are the people, and this is why we are in this struggle today. I also wanted to uplift that our ancestors were, I'll return back to our ancestors were considered chattel. They were never meant to be considered human beings on this land and never meant to be considered citizens. So everything that we have today is in spite of the American project and not necessarily because of the American project. Another thing that is often discussed in terms of reparations is the front and center discussion is compensation. And it often feels to me that we're talking about getting a slice of pie. Where the conversation, once we immediately get into compensation, goes to limited pieces and scarcity, and us talking about this as if we're scrambling for a seat at the table. But for me, reparations is more about patterns and more than a slice of something. It's about multiplicity. It's about repetition. It's about being woven together in that repair. It's about different but merging points of view. We have, and I like to think of it like a quilt. There's corners, there's the center, and each piece meeting a different need, creating wholeness. That's what I think about when I think about repair, to cover, provide warmth and protection to us all. And letting it be an ongoing pattern, not a one-time thing, not a one-time taking of a slice of something, but a pattern that's a change for good, an elimination of harms, and an ongoing pattern for repair and healing. So that's how I view reparations and comprehensive reparations, more than a slice of pie, but a pattern, like building and creating and sewing a quilt. So comprehensive reparations, sometimes referred to as harms-based reparations, focuses on repairing harms endured by Black communities, people of African descent. These harms began with chattel slavery, Jim Crow, systemic racism, and include their continuing vestiges today. So with comprehensive reparations, we want to repair communities with forward-thinking initiatives that safeguards our future, the future of Black America. Comprehensive reparations also focus on making reparations as accessible and inclusive and constructive as possible. It includes 3 primary periods addressing reparative justice for crimes against humanity. These would include the enslavement period, including the transatlantic slave trade, the intra-American slave trade, and overall chattel slavery. Then Jim Crow, or otherwise known as the US apartheid system, and today's modern day systemic racism. And with comprehensive reparations, we recognize that each period of harm can't be disconnected. Again, this is a woven process. So when seeking to repair injuries on a large scale, especially for state or national initiatives, sometimes we only focus on chattel slavery, but it's a limitation to do that because it doesn't sufficiently account for the ongoing harms and the continuation of enslavement under a different name. And contrary to popular belief, many African Americans weren't freed directly following the Emancipation Proclamation. So we need to not be so we have to be more intentional with our cutoffs, or not be so attached to particular cutoffs with time periods. Another thing is a question that keeps coming up. What's the difference between reparations and just good public policy? And ideally, good public policy would intersect with what we would want with reparative justice. However, reparations is connected to direct connections to the harms that were done through chattel slavery, Jim Crow, and ongoing systemic racism, and the vestiges. So we can connect enslavement with the prison industrial complex, direct association with the dislocation that happened of our ancestors with today's displacement and housing inequality, the medical torture that our ancestors endured and medical racism that we face today, the non-payment for work and the low wages that we receive today. All of these are things that academics and scholars and activists have highlighted, have direct connections to the period of chattel slavery and its ongoing vestiges and how they connect us today. Also wanted to highlight, like I said earlier, being careful and not attaching ourselves to strict cutoffs, because, for example, following emancipation, many of our ancestors were forced into slave-like conditions like the sharecropping system. That is something that my ancestors had to actually escape from as well, because people could be imprisoned for refusing to sharecrop. And so these are ongoing issues, like I mentioned earlier, displacement. And today we have fair housing that has been denied to our families, and this is an ongoing thing. Governmental policies that prevented African Americans from buying homes in various neighborhoods. Martin Luther King died, and it was 7 days after he died that the Fair Housing Act was passed. A lot of people don't even realize that that act was passed in his blood, basically. And this is still a part of the ongoing vestige of chattel slavery and continues to participate in racial wealth disparities and outcomes for Black families in America. So another thing to highlight is that comprehensive reparations are about human rights. And the right to self-determination. And we often go right into the debt that is owed. And it's certainly true that reparations and comprehensive reparations must address the economic toll of years of forced labor, while recentering anti-Black dehumanization, genocide, white supremacist terrorism, racism as the primary focus for change and remedies. So this includes financial compensation, but it significantly uplifts structural changes that benefits Black communities and remedies that overall dehumanization and criminalization of people of African descent. So addressing the racial wealth gap alone won't fix those issues. It has to be the overall change. Another thing highlighted in comprehensive reparations includes repairing harms caused by local and national governments. Comprehensive reparations examines and seeks to provide remedies to direct harms inflicted on the local and federal level. For example, some policies could addressed by comprehensive reparations include Black codes in various states, laws preventing fair housing, preventing African Americans from benefiting from the GI Bill. Comprehensive reparations also includes repairing harms caused by businesses, religious institutions, academic institutions, and examine and seek to provide remedies to direct harms inflicted by these entities that participated in chattel slavery, benefited from the slave trade, Jim Crow, etc. And one of the key parts of comprehensive reparations is that it prioritizes accessibility and rejects false purity ancestry standards for large-scale reparative justice initiatives. I know we'll talk about this in another session, but this is included in reparative justice because strict purity standards for reparative justice eligibility are often under-inclusive, create costly barriers, and are too restrictive for large-scale local government, state and national reparation justice initiatives. So eliminating unnecessary barriers is essential to reaching and repairing Black communities. Comprehensive reparations recognizes that our communities have endured centuries of ongoing delays and dehumanization and obstacles to our reparative justice. And we don't want to add more barriers within this process that are based on false purity standards and that are invasive and that actually place the onus of proof on our communities instead of placing that onus of proof on the governments that have harmed us. So again, requiring extensive genealogical background checks is just another costly barrier, potentially millions of dollars that could actually just be used in the repair process. And so comprehensive reparations advocates for other verifiable standards to gauge the needs and distribution of reparative justice resources to communities. Reparative justice, again, is harms. Comprehensive reparations is again harms focused. It includes African Americans and descendants of Africans harmed by the vestiges of slavery in the United States, but also regardless of national origin. While comprehensive reparations uplifts the descendants of Africans enslaved in the United States or descendants of free or maroon Black communities that are owed reparations, people of African descent residing in the United States that were also harmed by the vestiges of slavery, Jim Crow, regardless of national origin, are also owed forms of reparative justice. These might not always look the same or be the same, but they are also owed. Comprehensive reparations also includes direct family-based repair, providing remedies to descendants of harmed persons in specific families or neighborhoods. Primary examples of this would include Georgetown University's slave descendants, Bruce's Beach, Tulsa race massacre survivors, and their descendants, Gullah Geechee families that are experiencing land loss, Evanston housing discrimination survivors. In these cases, the descendants of harmed families can be directly remedied by at-fault parties on a case-by-case basis at smaller scale that prioritizes accessibility. So I'm just including some additional information. These are the UN basic principles that recognize the following as 5 forms of reparations: restitution, restoration of victims' rights, property, citizenship status, rehabilitation, psychological and physical support, compensation, satisfaction, acknowledgement of guilty, apology, burials, construction of memorials, etc., guarantees of non-repetition, reformation of laws and civil and political structures that lead to or are fueled by violence. I'm also including here the 5 injuries of slavery as defined by NCOBRA: peoplehood or nationhood, education, criminal punishment, wealth or poverty, and health. And then the National African American Reparations Commission has a 10-point reparations plan that is also comprehensive. It includes a formal apology and the creation of an institute, repatriation, the right of repatriation and creation of an African knowledge program, land and the right to land for social and economic development, funds for cooperative enterprises and socially responsible entrepreneurial development, health and wellness, resources for health and wellness, healing of Black families and communities, education for community development and empowerment, housing and wealth generation, affordable housing for healthy Black communities and wealth generation, info and communication structure, strengthening Black America's information and communications infrastructure, sacred sites and monuments, preserving Black sacred sites, and again, the criminal justice system, repairing the damages of the criminal injustice system. I also wanted to go back to We Charge Genocide, the historic petition to the United Nations for relief from a crime of the United States government against the Negro people. Because what we endured, again, is more than a debt owed. It is actually a form of genocide. And in this document, the author stated, the end of genocide against the Negro people of the United States will mean returning this country to its people. It will mean a new growth of popular democracy and the forces of peace. It will mean an end to the threat of atomic war. It will mean peace for the world and all mankind. And I really love this part of this document, and it reminds me of also another recent book, Olufemi Taiwo, Reconsidering Reparations, who reminded us that reparations are a world-making process. And what if building the just world was reparations? So that's just one of the questions from that book that sticks out to me, and really reconnecting reparatory justice through a comprehensive and constructive lens that is more than about just one thing or the other, but an interwoven process that generates and creates a new world for people of African descent to survive and thrive in. So those are my statements. I'm very interested in what my respondent, Nkechi Taifa, has to say. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen here. Thank you.
Jessica, J.A.M., Jessica M. Mitchell, Awara, thank you so very much for that very elucidating and comprehensive yet concise discussion dealing with the topic of comprehensive reparations. I really loved how you began with us as a people, because oftentimes, as you mentioned, the conversation starts with slavery as opposed to us as a people, and us as our resistance. You mentioned the Igbo landing situation, our resistance to this state of genocide that we've been in. I also loved how you gave the visual dealing with the pie versus the pattern, and that what we're talking about is more than a slice, and we're not talking about issues dealing with limitation, okay, which is what tends to happen. And you analogized it to a quilt with corners and centers and wholeness and ongoing patterns and different but merging points of view. So I appreciate all of that, and you really put that into some really good context. I want to mention something first, something to what you said towards the end. One of my pet issues when you illuminated the issue of genocide from the 1951 petition of the Negro people to the United Nations, calling for relief from this crime of genocide. And many times we in this country only see genocide in terms of the Holocaust of the Jewish people, or the annihilation, attempted annihilation of the Native population, the Native peoples in our country. But when you look at the United Nations definition of genocide, it is far more inclusive. It is, yes, it is indeed killing members of the group, but that definition also includes causing bodily or mental harm to members of the group, okay? It also includes deliberately inflicting upon the group conditions of life calculated to bring about their destruction in whole or in part. It also includes taking measures to prevent births within the group. It also includes transferring children from one group to the other. And then the definition goes on to say that genocide is not the only actionable crime. It says that conspiracy to commit genocide, directing public incitement to commit genocide, intent to commit genocide, and complicity. All of these are the definitions of genocide, but it goes even further. It also says that those guilty of genocide shall be punished, regardless of whether they are constitutionally protected rulers, public officials, or private citizens. And I'm quoting international law, but most folk don't realize that those provisions have also been codified within United States law in the US Code. And most of us, even lawyers, don't know, because I had a white lawyer debate me once, okay, that not only is it codified within US law, but the Genocide Convention Implementation Act that's in the US Code is the only United Nations treaty that is fully actionable in US law without what they call the need for extra or implementing legislation, because when it was ratified by the Senate, it came with that legislation. Now, after that, it was like the first human rights treaty that was codified by the United States. I think they realized what they did. And after that, every single human rights treaty says, well, we will sign this, but there has to be specific implementing legislation, whether you're talking about the Convention Against Torture or political and social rights or whatever. All of those are not immediately actionable, but the Genocide Convention is. And I just wanted to emphasize that because it was at this part of this crime against humanity that the Durban Conference in 2001 found. Genocide is part of that transatlantic slave trade, and you mentioned the intra-American slave trade and the system of chattel slavery. And all of that was part of that crime against humanity. So also, J.A.M., you talked about human rights and the right to self-determination. Okay, so I'm Nikichi Tayi for my soapbox, because I'm so very glad. And first of all, thank you for allowing people to have input into that document that you created. And hopefully you can put a website on there where people can find and access it. But the right to self-determination has always been very, very key to me, because when I started talking about the issue of reparations very, very, very early on, as a very young person, I was part of a movement. I'm still part of the movement called the New African Independence Movement that was initiated really by the Republic of New Africa. And when we were talking about reparations, we were talking about part and parcel of that is what we call the right to self-determination. This was during the time when the countries, the underdeveloped so-called third world countries around the world were gaining their independence, and they were talking about independence, and we're talking about self-determination, the right for a people to decide for themselves what they want their political destiny to be. So within the New African Independence Movement, what we said was that after the enslavement era, after 1865, when I don't even say when we were free, is when our human right to freedom was recognized by this genocidal government. Our human rights were recognized supposedly on paper in 1865. We were left with human rights choices as to what we wanted to do, what we wanted to be, where we wanted to build or whatever our political future. Within those human rights was we had the right to repatriate, to go back to Africa. We've been cruelly separated from the African continent, from our peoplehood. That's why in COBRA included within those 5 injury areas that are peoplehood, our culture, our names, our languages, our history, all of that had been stripped from us. So we had the right to try to reclaim that peoplehood, or even go back to that land, the mother continent of our origin, not to swim in the ocean naked, but with reparations to try to bring back and inculcate within us again that African personality. We also had the right to go somewhere else. I mean, Haiti had become independent. We had family members. I talk about lineage and descent. We had family members, bloodlines all over, the Western Hemisphere and the islands and in South America. And you just name it. We had the right, if we so chose to do that. We also had a right to seek to join this new white nation that was coming up. Okay, and strive to really make what we call a multiracial democracy real. But we also, in the New African Independence Movement, asserted that we had a right to remain on this soil as our homeland ties have been severed. We had a different language. We had different customs and things we had come up with, negotiate with the Native peoples on this territory and establish an independent Black nation state right here on this soil. So we said we had the right to each of those options after our freedom was recognized. But what happened was 2.5 years later, in 1868, the United States limited those international human rights self-determining options to just one. And that one was United States citizenship, okay? And what we said was, how are you going to make a free people and tell them they've got to become part of your family, especially since you castrated the father, raped the mother, sold the children off to your relatives? They didn't ask us. They didn't ask us if we wanted to join this white nation that was coming. In fact, after the Civil War, General Sherman sat down with Black ministers in Georgia, and he actually asked them, "What do you want?" And what did they say? They said, "We want land." And that's where this 40 acres came from. We want land. And he then said, "Well, do you want to be part of us and work with us in this new white nation?" They said, "No, we want to be to ourselves. We want to build and develop our land." It was still fresh from the castrations and the rapes and the beatings and the forced labor and the kidnapping of our children. All of that was still fresh in their minds at that time. And they said, "No, that's not what we want." And General Sherman did, in fact, listen. And he incorporated that demand that we made for land into his field order number 15, only to have it totally and completely stripped away, just decimated after the assassination of Lincoln. So here we are today with when we talk about citizenship. That is absolutely an option. And those who wish to really strive to make this multiracial democracy real must have policies and practices in place. Comprehensive reparations must include, okay, all of these issues that have been the legacies and the continuing vestiges of the enslavement era to make that choice real. Those who want to repatriate should have those resources also to be able to do so, to make that choice real. Those who want to go somewhere else have that right as well. And those who want to stay here and join in with the Native peoples and negotiate, establish an independent Black nation state on this soil, have that right as well. So that I just wanted to respond is part of this whole comprehensive reparations, the right to self-determination, the right to choice, which Cobra enshrined within its 5 injury areas of economics and wealth building and health and education, the right to our peoplehood and our nationhood as well. And let me just see, thank you for emphasizing that it's not just the racial wealth gap. That's absolutely and completely part of it. But for those who limited just to that, or limited our claim to reparatory justice just to the cutting of a check, are really selling us extremely short, okay? comprehensively, we must look at it that way. And then the last thing I'm going to say before we engage, in fact, you might want to start engaging the Q&A, is that there is international, proceedings that have uplifted a number of areas dealing with reparatory justice. And one of those is the UN General Assembly's December 2005 Basic Principles and Guidelines on the Right to a Remedy and Reparation for Victims of Gross Violations of International Human Rights Law and Serious Violations of International Humanitarian Law. International law likes to have long titles, and that is his title. And what that does is outline those forms of reparation that you elucidated in your presentation of restitution, compensation, rehabilitation, satisfaction, and guarantees of non-repetition. However, that instrument, that international instrument, international human rights reparatory justice instrument, nevertheless fails to expressly include within its ambit the term victim. They use the term victim, but they fail to include the generational realities of the international capturing and chattelization of human beings. And what I'm saying is that they talk about victims, meaning people who are living, or maybe their children, but it doesn't go back generations, as is the situation with Black people in this country, where the harm, the injury goes back and back and back and back. Okay. As such, when we talk about the issue of full reparations, which is why I prefer the term that we are talking about in this session, the term comprehensive reparations, because the concept as is currently elucidated in international arenas refers to international law. I'm rooted in the reality of a crime against humanity that goes far beyond economically accessible harms, lost opportunities, and material damages. So it's not just enough to add it up, okay? Although that's a part of it, but that's not the end all, because it has not stopped. It is ongoing. Will it ever be full? I say no, but it can be comprehensive, okay? It cannot be a situation that, okay, once we ascertain this and it's done, here's your full reparations and that's it. No, it continues and it continues and continues until there is no repetition of the harm as you laid out. So I think that's all that I wanted to respond to, other than to just emphasize what you said, that comprehensive reparations focuses on making reparations accessible, inclusive, and I can't understand my writing.
Constructive.
Constructive. I was, is that constitutional? Okay, accessible, inclusive, and constructive. Thank you so very much. So let's take a look to see if there are any questions in the Q&A. Since you probably had a chance to take a look at it, why don't you make a first stab at what's there?
Yes. So the first one is making good public policy a form of repair or restitution?
Okay, so let me just start and then let you go on and continue. I always say that reparations has got to be more than basic public policy. One of the things you mentioned in your presentation, there can be intersections, but it must be something that goes beyond what is supposed to happen anyway for the good of everyone. Part of what was, I don't know if it's the Constitution or the preamble or the Gettysburg, one of those things talks about to promote the general welfare and assure the blessings of liberty, blah, 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 blah. But promoting the general welfare is supposed to be happening anyway. What is that extra that reparations or reparatory justice encompasses, and that's what we're talking about. So why don't you add on or elucidate a little bit further with respect to
Yeah,
that
I
question?
think the same thing. I think it needs to be directly connected to a harm. I think that the restitution, the repair or restitution is different from public policy in that it's directly connected to a harm that was specific to uh, chattel slavery, Jim Crow, and the vestiges. And I think that, like Nikichi was highlighting, I think good public policy would intersect with that, because good public policy to me would include access to housing and all these other things. However, it's not the same thing, because that is something that isn't necessarily directly about repairing that harm. And I think in order for it to be repair or restitution, it needs to be centered on repairing those specific harms.
Absolutely. Thank you. Let me read the next one that I see here. It says, Hotep, my two sisters. I don't have a question, as y'all have been comprehensive. I want to say Asante Sana to y'all for this learning opportunity. I am Monsoon Kulubale. I might be pronouncing wrong. I've seen this name a lot, but Kulubale out of Chicago. So thank you, my brother. Okay. Do you want to go next?
Okay. The other question, in those guidelines on reparations does not say number one is restitution, which means restoring us back to the status or condition we were in before violation. That is self-determination. With self-determination, we can fix the other problems. Asserting that right is an offensive move that we must take. We don't have to wait on the government. So I guess.
Okay, I didn't see the rest of that question. I
was
see
broken.
broken down. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let me just start by saying, in my humble opinion, we will never be totally and completely restored to the status or condition that we were in before the violation. We will never be. We can do restitution type of processes that will help to repair and help to heal. But in my humble opinion, we will never be totally restored to where we were before. And I could give a lot of examples with respect to that. And J.A.M, please feel free to disagree with me if you have a different interpretation, but that's just my opinion. And I don't know why all the other questions went away except for one.
The ones that we answered, I just hit that.
Oh, I see. Okay, go on.
Yeah, so that
Okay.
we can go through.
I got you.
All right, so this next one, Ngozi Williams. As an Africana woman educator, researcher, how can I contribute to elevating data, evidence, discussion on education as an area of harm, specifically comprehensive reparations for harm caused by hundreds of years of miseducation, unequal and inequitable education, resulting in trauma that impedes the academic, social, and emotional learning and well-being for children and adult students who are descendants of enslaved Africans? Apologies for long question.
Wow. I will just say, my dear sister Ngozi, we would love to have your expertise as part of one of the many different commissions that are task forces that are being set up around the country. I know that you're in California, right there in California. I don't know if you had an opportunity to testify. I know that there are also community sessions where people can testify, but there are also task forces being set up around the country where they would love to have your expertise or your testimony. We're hoping once we pass HR 40, S40, and or an executive order of reparations for a federal bill is signed by the president, that there will be opportunity within that commission where persons such as you can come and testify with your knowledge of the data, evidence, and the like with respect to specifically education. But I also put out to other people who have expertise in other areas in terms of health, in terms of wealth, in terms of the right to self-determination and repatriation and the criminal punishment system. So there are many ways in which people can be involved right here, right now, because we are history in the making right now. We are doing it. We are making history right now. And we would love to have you and your expertise Sister Ngozi Williams to be a part of that as well. And we just want to invite people, if you have, okay, I see it now, Q&A is open. If let us know if you're having problems posting your questions. We may not get to every question, but I think there might be another one that's there. J.A.M.
So Ramuzu was, I guess, clarifying their earlier question about the self-determination. So they were saying, I believe they meant restored, meaning governing ourselves again, which can happen by asserting our right or self-determination. If we don't stand or assert our right or self-determination, do you think the enemy we take and will take an initiative to repair us?
I wholeheartedly believe in the right to self-determination. And it's something that we as the injured party, the victim class, must do and must assert. And you're absolutely correct. The enemy will not take any initiative. In fact, they will take, as they have sought to do in the past, they will take our self-determination away from us and limit it to whatever options that that they want. And let me also emphasize, this has nothing to do with the last question. I just want to make sure that we emphasize that in defining comprehensive, we're talking about elevating the term multi-generational, because that's one of the areas that I feel is currently deficient in the international discussions dealing with Black people in this country, that it is multi-generational. And I'm hoping that with many of the new attention to international law, the new U.S. Permanent Forum on the people of African descent, we're coming to the close of the International Decade of People of African Descent. There's the second Permanent Forum session that's going to be in New York at the end of May. The first one was in Geneva. I'm hoping with all this new energy, I guess you could say, on the international front, that we will be able to really contribute to the international nomenclature, as opposed to just simply adapting what they already have and try to squeeze it into our circumstances. We need to put our circumstances out there and demand that the international community adopt our analysis as such.
So we have another question, and this is, what is your thought on referendums to independence? So can you provide, this is from K.Mu Kamal, could you provide more information on what you mean to that?
And while he's doing that, the first thing that comes to my mind, which might not be what he's speaking of, but the first thing that comes to my mind is that, again, I cut my reparations teeth in the New African Independence Movement, which talks about a national plebiscite, which is a term that means a people's vote as to what we want as our indicia of self-determination, not something that one group of people say, well, it's got to be this way, or you've got to be called this, or you got to be called that. No, it's for the people as a whole to determine what we want our political destiny to be, whether we want it to, or those, and everybody doesn't have to agree on the same thing, but those who want to be patriots have their reparations. Those who in this referendum or this plebiscite want to go somewhere else should be able to do that. Those who want to remain and be part and strive to make a multiracial democracy real within the context as citizens of the United States have that right. But those who want to establish an independent Black nation state on their own on this soil also have that right. So the New African Independence Movement said there should be a plebiscite or people's vote, not something within the OMB that says, okay, they get lobbied by one group and say, okay, we're going to call you this or we're going to call you that. No, international, a plebiscite, national plebiscite under the auspices of the international community for us to decide and make that decision. And so that's what he is saying. Yes, that's what he was talking about. He says, Ramu Yunis says, Indeed, the Republic of New Africa and the New African Independence Movement said we should hold that referendum or plebiscite. And again, what we say is that is part of a reparations settlement. Okay, and we call it a settlement because I would just say this: the National African American Reparations Commission (NARC's) preamble expressly states, and I'm quoting, "No amount of material resources or monetary compensation can ever be sufficient restitution for the spiritual, mental, cultural, and physical damages inflicted on Africans by centuries of the Ma'afa, the Holocaust of enslavement, and the institution of chattel slavery." So again, that's why I say it's a settlement. It's a negotiated settlement. We're not going to get it all. We're not going to, in my humble opinion, ever achieve full reparations because of the multi-generational harms that there has been, but we can settle. We can agree upon or negotiate a settlement. And all of what J.A.M. presented in her excellent presentation of comprehensive reparations are elements of what that settlement, what that negotiation final product can look like.
Thank you so much. We are coming up on time, but I wanted to add, so I was going back through your book in preparation today, your book and Olafemi's book. So I also wanted to uplift, I mean, I talked about criminal injustice in the presentation, but the fact that often in these discussions, we are not talking about political prisoners in the reparations conversation, and that I just want to uplift that should be also a core component of comprehensive reparations, that we should be part of these negotiations. Part of this settlement should be the release of political prisoners.
I am so glad you mentioned that. And I just put my link where you can purchase my book, Reparations on Fire, in the chat. But thank you. Just yesterday, the IMLR, the United Nations, United Nations, there was a United Nations delegation looking at issues in the United States dealing with law enforcement abuses. And the first hearing, they're going around, they're having testimony in 5 different cities. The first city was yesterday in Atlanta, Georgia, and the issue of political prisoners, prisoners of war, and exiles were part of the testimony that was solicited by this international body. And on my radio show, Human Rights and Justice, yesterday we featured that. We had presentations from Julia Wright, who is the daughter of the acclaimed author Richard Wright, who was able to get Angela Davis to provide a statement on behalf of Ruchell Magee, who is the longest held political prisoner in this country, maybe in the world, almost 60 years in prison. He was Angela Davis's co-defendant. So she testified. Bilal Sunni Ali, famed tenor saxophonist with the former Gil Scott Heron's Midnight Band, and also a key spokesperson for the Free Imam Jamil Al-Amin committee, who's also known as H. Rap Brown, Messiah Ehehosi, Chinganji Ayin Leila, and I forgot my other brother, and Kwame Kalimara, Sister Afia Imwangaza were all part of that, bringing that information before this international body that's touring the United States right now. They're going to be going to Chicago. They're going to be going to California. They're going to be going to Minneapolis and maybe 1 or 2 other cities. So stay tuned for that. So yes, the freedom of our political prisoners must be part of a reparations settlement as well. I didn't mean to go off on that, but I'm so glad that you brought that up.
Thank you. So I think we have time for one more question. And this is from Grace Shimizu. I heard about the connection of slavery and European colonialism in Africa and the Americas, and how reparations demand can reflect such connection. What could this mean for slavery connection to development of racial capitalism in the US, and how vestiges of slavery connects to harms under ongoing racial capitalism? I think, that's a part of the ongoing discussion about comprehensive reparations, because that is a part of the continuing harm. We know that the United States rose to wealth through chattel slavery, and that that wealth was built off of the enslavement of our ancestors and ongoing racial capitalism. So that's definitely connected and a part of the conversation about why we need comprehensive reparations and why the harm is interconnected and it continues. Because what is being told to us now is, you were never a slave, why are you owed reparations? But what's not being, well, we are discussing it, but what other people that are opposed to reparations will say is that we have absolutely no connection to that enslavement harm. Where you are pointing out here with slavery, European colonialism, and ongoing racial capitalism highlights the fact that it is an ongoing harm and an ongoing struggle. But Nikichi, do you have any thoughts on this?
I think you answered it quite well. Thank you very much. And I will say, if and when a true and just reparations settlement that satisfies everything that we've talked about today comes to pass, I can assure you the system in this country of capitalism probably won't look like it looks now. Yeah. So I think we're coming to a close right now. If you want to mention the next in the series, Reparation Information Thought Series, that will be held on May the 25th, Thursday, at this same time, 7 p.m. Eastern time, called Lineage, Burden of Proof, Difficult, Divisive, and Under-Inclusive. If you registered for this webinar here, you will receive notice for how to register. It's not the same registration link, so be on the lookout for that. But you can mark your calendars now for May 25th at 7 p.m. So you want to just thank everybody again?
Yes, thank you so much to everyone that attended and joined us tonight. I hope that you got a great overview of comprehensive reparations and what we mean when we say comprehensive reparations. And you can learn more about comprehensive reparations and get access to many different historical documents and information at aboutreparations.org. It has an entire document about comprehensive reparations, as well as a whole wealth of information available to learn. You should also go to reparationeducationproject.org, led by Nikichi Taifa. And you can also go to nbcit.org, which is the website for National Black Cultural Information Trust.